Good morning and welcome to the morning briefing. It's Thursday, September 22nd. It's episode 198. I'm Phil Brandt, President and CEO of AIM. And with me, as always, is your friend and mine, Burt Garland, shareholder with Ogletree Deacons. Together, we bring practical, timely, and accurate insight into today's workplace, as it is our goal to keep you informed so you can more effectively lead your organization. Welcome back to the program today, Burt. How are you?
Thank you, Phil. I'm doing well. We've got happy autumnal equinox 2022 at 8:03 p.m. tonight. That, of course, marks the time of the year that the sun in the northern hemisphere, the sun crosses the celestial equator in the southern direction.
So what that really means is our day and night are balanced perfectly for this one day.
Correct, and the days are really we've noticed they've started to get shorter and shorter, and now the nights are going to be longer than the days here and after until spring.
Yeah, so I don't like this time of the year. I'll be honest. I don't mind fall. I just don't like when it gets dark so early and for so long. I prefer the daylight. But nevertheless, that's not why everyone joined to listen to the program today. They wanted to hear us talk about dealing with difficult people. And I know this isn't a challenge for most anyone. It's a challenge for everyone.
Phil, let me stop you. I know you want to move on, but I really want to continue talking about the autumnal equinox.
Go ahead. If there's something more you must say.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm not trying to be difficult, Phil, but I mean, I think we really should spend more time talking about that. I think that's why people are here.
Well, Burt, no, they did not hear. They came to listen to you, but not to listen to you talk about the equinox.
All right.
So if it's the same with you, we're going to move on, or you can go hit the road, Jack.
All right.
All right.
That's a good way to tee up our program, huh?
That's it. We are going to deal with Burt Garlands all day today. So let's talk about what our plans and strategies are to do that. We all deal with difficult people all the time. It is probably the number one thing that causes headaches for you, our HR listeners, and our managers and owners who are running their business, because it's not necessarily people who are doing something completely wrong and against the work rules. It's that very fine line. They're just difficult to work with, and our life would be a little bit easier. Our workplace might be a little bit more balanced in harmony if we didn't have them in there. But what do we do with them? And that is what I want to talk about today. Let's get to our poll question first. The question is, do you have someone in your organization that is a net negative contributor? And we have several answers for you to pick from, and we'd love to get your feedback in the comments on this. We already have a comment in here from Dave, and that's the one I want to lead with. Dave has said they have constant coaching and evaluation for all team members. We plan to move from annual to quarterly performance reviews. Now, Burt, we saw this question actually before the programming even started. So Dave was an early riser and made his comment. This is an interesting trend to go to quarterly reviews away from annual reviews during these times. What's your thoughts on this?
So, yeah, I mean, you say it's an interesting trend. It is absolutely positively against the trend these days. And I love what Dave's doing here with this. I think this is tremendous.
All right. So tell us more. You're picking on the difficult people now, Burt.
Well, you know what? That's just too bad. That's tough luck. I'm going to pick on the difficult people. So the reason why I like this is because right now the trend has been, it's not as prominent as it has been in the past year, 2, 3 years. But the trend still is for employers to move away from doing formal performance reviews. And I think that's a huge mistake. And the reason is because you never know which of your employees is going to be the employee that's ultimately going to be the one to be terminated under difficult circumstances. And that may lead to a charge of discrimination or eventually a lawsuit. And if we don't have documentation to support the job action, the termination, demotion, et cetera, it makes it very difficult to defend those claims. And so if you are actually moving to a, more formalized performance management, ongoing review process, that helps immensely when it comes time to defend a claim of harassment or discrimination.
Yep.
And so I love what Dave is talking about here. The important thing is that it needs to be documented. And whether the performance review is formal, a formal written performance review, or if it's just a discussion, which is ongoing performance management, it does need to be documented. And so again, it's against the trend these days, and I love what Dave is doing with this. One thing I want to make very clear, though, is this only works if your people who are doing the evaluations are properly trained and educated to really evaluate people. One thing that could come back to haunt you is if you practice what I've termed many times on this program, if you practice in grade inflation, this could come back to actually haunt you. And so you need to remember that if we take a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being the worst performer, 5 being the best performer, the person who shows up every single day and does their job, does nothing more, does nothing less, they don't really cause you any problems, but they're also not quite an overachiever, they're not going the extra mile, that's a 3. And there's nothing wrong with that person being a 3. That is not the 4 or the 5. The person who shows up every day and does their job, that is meeting our expectations. And if you're rating those folks as 4s and 5s, that probably means you're rating your poor performers as 2s and 3s. And so you need to make sure that you understand the scale that you're using to evaluate the employees. And if you're not using a formalized rating system of 1 through 5, I'm fine with that, so long as the documentation properly describes the person's performance and whether they need some sort of improvement or are really a quality part of the team.
Now, I practiced HR, Burt, almost as long as you've been practicing law. Yep. But what I would tell you is most of the terminations I have been involved with, and it has been way too many to be proud of, are not related to a really hard measurement, in the sense that, it's attendance, as an example. It's black and white as it can be. It always seems to consider these soft skills, soft judgment areas of you're difficult, you're not easy to get along with. You don't fit in the team as well as everyone else does because of your attitude. And often not any other factor, but the person's difficult. And what I often wanted to do is avoid being the stick in the mud in HR, where someone would come in and say, hey, look, we're going to pick on producer Nick today. I want to get rid of producer Nick because he's really difficult to deal with. It's not that he doesn't do his job. It's not that he's not on time. In fact, he shows up early just to aggravate people, and I want him off my team. And then I become the HR guy that's saying, well, have you documented it yet? Have you talked to him? Well, we've had lots of conversations, but no, I haven't documented. Well, we're not going to fire him until you document it. Why do we have to do all that? And, it's employment at will. Let's just move the guy out and move on.
Yeah, well, so let's establish a baseline here, and that is making sure everybody understands what employment at will really means. What that means is that you or the employee can terminate the employment relationship at any time for any reason at all or no reason at all, so long as the reason is not an illegal reason. So
Right.
That means there's a lot of exceptions to the employment at will doctrine.
So difficult's not a discriminating factor. So
Correct.
Let's just get rid of the poor soul and move on.
Yeah, so that's what you would like to think.
That's what I would like to do.
Yeah, exactly. The problem then becomes is that poor soul, that difficult person, are they in a protected category that would mean that, okay, you're saying you're going to get rid of them because they're difficult. Does that person get to come back and say, well, they told me that I'm difficult, but what they really mean is they don't like me because I'm black, or they don't like me because of my religion, or they don't like me because of my age, or they don't like me because of my disability, or one of the other many categories, national origin, I said religion already,
Yeah.
my gender status, those types of things. And
All the things that are protected.
correct. And if you're terminating somebody, not because they're difficult, but because of one of those categories, that would be illegal. Those are exceptions to the employment at will doctrine. And so if you go to the employee and you talk to the employee and you say, you're difficult, we just really don't like you, we're going to terminate your employment, and you don't have a documented history of the problems that the person is causing at work, the issues that are coming to the forefront of why this person is difficult. If you go ahead and part company, that person, if they're in that protected category, they're going to have the ability to come back and bring a claim against the employer. It might not be a good claim, but they're going to have the ability to bring a claim against the employer, and they're going to say, I don't have any performance documentation. They never disciplined me. They never did anything. And they come up to me one day and say, we're getting rid of you because you're difficult. Well, where's the documentation on that? They don't have any. So it must be for another reason. And it's because of my protected category.
Yeah. And someone may side with them in that decision.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So let's take it a step further. And the supervisor comes in and says, hey, Phil, I've talked to Nick 5-6 times about his attitude at work and the fact that he's being difficult. Do you have any documentation? No, but I have talked to him 5 or 6 times, just this year alone. Yep. So I've given him verbal warnings, and let's assume that's actually true and that has happened, but they're verbal warnings or verbal messages. I don't even know if I would qualify all that as a warning technically in a formal structure. But that alone doesn't hold up without some form of documentation. Does that verbal warning need to be documented? And if so, in the employee file or a notation?
So either way, but yes, it should be documented. Anytime you give a counseling to someone, whether it's just stopping by and saying, hey, you need to improve, you need to fix this, you need to get along better with people at work. If it's worth commenting on to the employee, it's worth documenting. Now, how do you go about documenting it? Ideally, you write something down, you jot down a note, and yes, I would prefer that it ends up in the personnel file. But if it doesn't end up in the personnel file, if it ends up in some sort of a journal or a calendar that you as the employer keep from day to day about things going on in the workplace, that's better than nothing. Another great way to do it is by email. And the reason why I like email is because it's date and time stamped. And so if you send either yourself a note about it, or hopefully you've had some sort of dialogue with somebody else in the organization about the issue, and there's maybe been a little bit of dialogue back and forth about what the poor performance is, what the difficulty of the behavior is, so that you have some documentation about it, and then you can address that with the employee. And whether that actually ends up in the personnel file or not is another thing. But as long as it's there, that's the critical piece.
So really, from a separation, a termination standpoint, whether those notations, emails, notes in a notebook, a more formal note that goes into an employee file, as long as we have the record proving the conversation, that's what you're looking for on those verbal warnings.
Yeah, that's the critical piece. Just something that, someday when it lands on my desk, I can put together a timeline and show that the person was on notice of the poor behavior, the difficulty at work, their difficult personality, and that they failed to improve. And that's how you build a defensible case.
Yeah, and what I would not recommend, because I've had this happen and it creates larger issues than dealing with a single source difficult person, is having my supervisors keeping all these little notes, and they have a little black notebook that they keep their notes in, where employees start to feel like, oh, well, you know, there Phil is again, keeping notes on everybody. What's he got written in that book? And then it creates a bigger concern for those that shouldn't be concerned. So I really do recommend following more of your discipline policy, should you have one, to make sure that you're really putting those in the employee file. Because if they are kept in a notebook in a supervisor's drawer and they have the real file, as people will start to interpret that creates larger employee relations issues.
It can. I definitely think that having the notes or having it in email, it's definitely better than not having it at all. But yeah, to the extent you can make sure that it gets in the personnel file, and if you're giving a verbal counseling to somebody, you should document that verbal. Doesn't mean it's a written. Written usually means that you write it down and you have the employee sign that they got the written warning.
All right, I want to get to the poll question, but before I do that, I want to ask one more question here. All right, so let's just say we're dealing again with Nick. I mean, producer Nick, you and I work with him a lot. He really can be a real pain.
A real difficult personality, absolutely.
Right, so what's wrong with this approach, or what do you like or not like about the approach regardless of the position the individual holds in the organization, high or low? You bring them in and you sit down and say, look, Nick, you're not fitting in to the organization with with our workplace desired culture. And you're really being difficult for many people to work with. And on a couple occasions, we've chatted about it. What I'd like to do is offer you a month or two of severance and just have you go your own way. Should you choose not to take that, then we're going to continue down this path of progressive discipline. And if you do not change your position, you'll end up being terminated. And at that point, there'll be no severance to match that termination.
Yeah, so that's a perfectly fine approach, against assuming that you have the appropriate documentation in place leading up to all of that. One thing you said, Phil, that you kind of mentioned it, but I want to make sure that the listeners heard it, is that what you said was, we've talked to you about this numerous times in the past. Okay. Right. And so one of the things that employers can do is, if they haven't been great about documenting past performance problems, when an employer does finally decide to start documenting, you have an opportunity as the employer to catch up the history right there. And so you can put things in the written disciplinary or in the written documentation, things just like you said. We've talked to you numerous times about this in the past. Okay. And by doing that, you're sort of catching the history up to the documentation at that point. To get to your question, though, what's wrong with that approach? Really, there's nothing wrong with that approach, again, so long as you have documentation that tells the story of why you're doing this. A lot of times you will see claims that when the employer talks in terms of culture and teamwork, that people will say, well, what they really mean by that is they mean that I'm not part of their culture, or I'm not a team player because of my protected category.
Right.
So the critical piece is you need to have examples of not why their protected category might or might not contribute to them not being part of the team. You need to have the concrete examples of their performance or their behavior not being part of the team.
Absolutely. And it often comes down to that. I know when I was working and coaching with managers, it really was focusing more times than not their performance. We have a comment here. I actually think it's from it might be Dave, and this is a different Dave here, and he wants to be really clear. He continues to be the thorn in our side, and he loves to take an opposing view in our chat box. We like Dave's comments. We often giggle and talk about them off air, Dave, behind your back. But Dave is saying that, often they're some of your better performers, right? And I've always kind of interpreted that as, these are probably really smart, intelligent people who can perform their job task maybe at a quicker or faster rate than someone else. And because of that, they get bored and they entertain themselves with agitating others, just like I used to do to my brothers when we were little kids, and I would agitate them because I could, and I was just one step ahead of them in age, which gave me an advantage. And I think in that case, you're not really dealing with performance of the task of the job as much as we are the behaviors related to the job, and separating them. But one is not always more important than the other, as long as we take a consistent approach.
Yeah, this is a great point, and this is something that I have to contend with often when clients call in, is the high performer. What do you do with the high performer that's causing problems in the workplace? A lot of employers are probably more willing to accept misbehavior from a high performer because they are the high performer. They're generating a lot of revenue for the organization. I see this really often in sales type jobs.
Oh, yeah.
Where the salesperson is just an extremely difficult personality. They're causing all kinds of problems in the workplace, but the employer turns a blind eye to it because that person is such a high contributor. And the problem with that is, of course, is that you as the employer are not properly disciplining that employee. You're putting the profits ahead of perhaps this person.
That's right. Yep.
Sexually harassing other employees, bullying other employees, treating other employees poorly because of some other protected category. And at the end of the day, if you as the employer don't properly handle that situation, you may find yourself in a lawsuit where you are having to defend this, and the plaintiff's attorney is going to paint you out as that employer who put profits ahead of the legal responsibility to prevent harassment and discrimination in the workplace.
And the cue I would always give when we're doing training and talking about these things, because there are techniques and strategies to have here, with always this: if you catch yourself saying, or you have other people in your organization saying, "Oh, that's just Nick. You'll get used to Nick. He really doesn't mean any harm." That is a huge red flag that you're putting the profit or the performance success related to what the job Nick is doing above the workplace behaviors. And that's a red flag, and you should be evaluating that scenario. Nick, let's pull up the chart here if we can, and just take a look at what people are saying to the poll question.
We got it right here.
That's a great segue into the poll. Because I think that the poll results here, Phil, really bear out that employers will tolerate difficult people, and you know, they over half the people who've responded to the poll are saying that they plan on retaining difficult people for the time being. And there's obviously myriad reasons why they will retain them, not the least of which is the poor economy these days and not being able to find employees, but you know, some of those folks in the, yes, we plan on retaining them for the time being, they may be retaining them because they're high performers. Who knows?
I would love to have.
And we are seeing that in our chat as well. Lots of people, you know, Donna's got a comment here, and many others are saying the same thing about right now we're holding on to them because it's hard to find other people. And I think that's the opposite. A couple episodes ago, we talked about quietly quitting, and, you know, the opposite of that is, you know, you're being quietly fired. You just don't know it. Mm-hmm. The problem is going to be if you're not documenting that quietly fired, when the time comes, it's going to be a little bit more difficult than you wish it to be.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, I think the chairman of the Fed yesterday, after they raised interest rates, I think by 0.75%, said things are going to continue to get more difficult, and basically jobs are next, meaning that they fully expect layoffs to be coming at this point. So that could turn around these days, and you know, sometime in the near future where things balance out a little bit more, that you're having an easier time finding employees, and therefore you aren't afraid from the employer standpoint of disciplining or taking adverse action against these folks who are difficult in the workplace.
Yeah. Go ahead, Nick. Did you want to give us a quick overview on those results?
Yeah, I think that's only fair because we have a listening audience as well. So what Burt was referring to is 52.9% answered yes, and we plan on retaining them for the time being. And I'd love to get actually some of the comments of reasons why that may be, as we've discussed several on the show. After that, 23.5% say no because they have lucked out thus far. Hopefully they remain in that little area there. 11.8% yes, and we plan to separate from them soon, followed by the last couple are 6% each, which is no because we terminate them as swiftly as possible, and no because our hiring process is successful at avoiding them.
Yeah. So let me make a quick comment here. I'm going to focus on those 2 and the 6% there. No, because our hiring process is successful at avoiding them. That's tremendous. Maybe you can share with us what some of your successful hiring processes are that allows you to avoid hiring these difficult people. But the other 6% was no because we terminate them as swiftly as possible. Those are great. I love those. I am of the opinion that when you have a difficult employee, that yes, sometimes you can improve that. Sometimes things do improve through performance management. But more often than not, if you have a problematic employee, that employee is going to remain problematic over time. Yeah. And, you know, again, I'm not saying that's all of the time, but that is more often the case than not. If they don't fit in, if they're not performing properly, in my opinion, you're better separating sooner rather than later. And I think that having great processes in place, and then if you see problems, if you see warning signs, you part company with the employee, you make the difficult decision early before you've invested too much time and money in that employee, and vice versa.
Yeah. So another thought here, risk versus reward. Angie had a good comment here, and basically what she's saying is we're not going to deal with the person the supervisor is unwilling to because they're a near-term retiree. And I've dealt with that multiple times. Well, they're going to retire in a year or two, so we're not going to deal with it. Or, you know, they're obviously older. We don't know when they're retired, but it's going to be soon, and they've been here a long time. And the supervisor is unwilling to deal with it. I've had scenarios where then that forced us as leadership to deal with the supervisor, for one, for not following, you know, the workplace behavior practices that we're looking for and enforcing them with all employees equally, old and young, new versus those who have been here a while, or where you have to force the supervisor to deal with it, which they choose to do, but reluctantly. Any thoughts? Because I know that's a really common storyline sometimes that we deal with.
Yeah, I think the difficulty in that position is you have somebody who's near retirement, and what have you historically done with them? If you start all of a sudden documenting their negative performance or their difficulty at work, do they then think that, okay, now you're all of a sudden doing this because of my age?
You're forcing me out.
Yeah, exactly. You're papering my files so that you can force me out. And so I think that, you as the employer, you just want to be careful on how you message that. And, you don't want to go to the employee and say, hey, I've noticed in the last couple of years, you've really become difficult to work with. You don't want to do something like that. You don't want to say in the last couple years, because that has age connotations. What you want to do is you want to be prepared with specific examples. And I don't mind if you go to the employee and say, look, in the past, you haven't done X, Y, and Z, but recently you have been doing X, Y, and Z. These are the things, the actual things that you're doing that are causing problems in the workplace.
Absolutely. I think the key thing is to create that dialogue. One, your supervisors and managers must have the skills to deal with this. And that starts with training them professionally. AIM always has great programs for that. We do a ton of training in this space. You can find more of that online. And then two, having a consistent practice from your HR department on how we verbal and written warning and document and control the documentation message so that we can act when it is time to act. And then seek out the right counsel and advice as you need to. Burt, let's just tee up a teaser before we go for next week, because this, I think, is going to be a really good discussion. So right off the presses, we have Home Depot's first ever union petition in Philadelphia. And this is big news because Home Depot has made a significant effort to remain union free. So that is going to be our topic next week. Anything you'll add to that before we get going?
No, I think it's really an important discussion for us to have. We've been talking many times this year about the unions really trying to turn the tide and organizing the last 30, 40 years where unionization has just been plummeting in this country. And they are making a real effort to try to turn that trend around. And I think that the Home Depot attempt and what we're seeing in the rest of the restaurant and retail sector these days is something that all employers need to pay attention to.
When your back is against the wall, you come out swinging. And I think that's what we're seeing. All right. So what we've decided today is no paddling for your employees as a form of discipline in dealing with difficult people. That is a comment from somebody in our chat section. Quite funny. Of course, we know there's no paddling. We will be back here next week at 7:30 Central Time. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Tell your story, promote your products, communicate with your employees and customers vividly, dynamically, and powerfully. Whether it's a company video, recruitment video, online training, or live meeting, Feature Group can help you, from scripting to highly polished finished production. Whether it's live or on demand, we have the skills and equipment to wow your audience and drive your message home. Feature Group USA, the one-stop shop for all your broadcasting needs.